It was February 13th, just before Valentine's Day, and I found myself on my last delivery of the night to apartment number 5 in Wick Tower, Youngstown, Ohio. The late hour and the ominous stillness of the building sent a shiver down my spine, but the promise of a generous tip urged me forward. As I approached the door, a sense of unease gnawed at me, but I pushed aside my apprehension and rang the doorbell. Silence greeted me, intensifying the feeling of dread that coiled in the pit of my stomach. Ignoring the warning signs, I knocked on the door, hoping for a response. But there was none. With a deep breath, I reached for the doorknob, hesitating for a moment before pushing the door open. The apartment was cloaked in darkness, the only light filtering through the curtains casting eerie shadows across the room. A musty odor filled the air, sending a shiver down my spine as I stepped cautiously into the apartment. The silence was deafening, broken only by the faint sound of my own footsteps echoing through the empty space. Suddenly, a whisper pierced the silence, causing me to freeze in place. It was as if the very walls were speaking to me, their words filled with a chilling sense of foreboding. Panic surged through me as I searched frantically for the source of the sound, but there was nothing to be seen. Before I could gather my wits, a figure materialized before me, a specter cloaked in shadow and despair. Its eyes gleamed with malevolence as it advanced towards me, its form twisting and contorting in the darkness. Terrified, I stumbled backwards, my heart pounding in my chest as I sought escape from this nightmare. But the apartment seemed to shift and warp around me, trapping me in its sinister embrace. In a desperate bid for help, I reached for my phone and dialed 911, praying that someone would answer. To my relief, a voice answered on the other end, and I struggled to convey the details of my situation before darkness enveloped me, and I lost consciousness. When I awoke, I found myself lying in a hospital bed, surrounded by the sterile scent of antiseptic and the muted sounds of medical equipment. A police officer stood nearby, his expression grave as he questioned me about the events that had led me there. As I recounted my harrowing ordeal, the officer exchanged a solemn glance with his colleague. It was then that they revealed the chilling truth, that the apartment I had ventured into was the scene of a brutal murder that had occurred just a year prior. The victim, a young woman, had been slain by her own partner in a fit of jealous rage, her tragic fate echoing through the halls of Wick Tower. As the reality of my brush with death sank in, I couldn't help but feel a profound sense of gratitude for the unseen forces that had intervened on my behalf. But even as I lay there, recovering from my ordeal, I knew that the horrors of that night would haunt me for the rest of my days, a chilling reminder of the thin veil that separates the living from the dead, and the darkness that lurks within us all. The night was draped in an unsettling silence, broken only by the occasional shuffle of papers and the soft hum of the overhead light. I was alone in my apartment, nestled in the heart of a bustling city, a sanctuary of solitude where I could lose myself in the comforting embrace of my books. But on this particular night, the stillness was disturbed by a presence lurking just beyond the threshold of my door. As the hours stretched on and the hands of the clock crept closer to midnight, a faint growling sound reverberated through the stale air of my study. At first, I dismissed it as nothing more than the creaking of old pipes or the whisper of the wind outside. But as the growling grew more pronounced, clawing its way into my consciousness, I could no longer ignore the creeping sense of unease that washed over me like a cold, clammy wave. I peered cautiously through the peephole of my apartment door, heart pounding in my chest like a trapped animal. What I saw on the other side sent a chill down my spine, freezing the blood in my veins. There, illuminated by the dim glow of the hallway light, stood a figure cloaked in shadows. A woman, her face obscured by a curtain of tangled, matted hair that hung in greasy strands around her pallid features. She stood with her back to me, facing the wall opposite my door, her body swaying gently as if caught in some unseen current. The growling emanated from her throat in low, guttural tones, filling the air with a primal, otherworldly resonance that seemed to seep into the very walls of my apartment. I stood frozen in place, unable to tear my gaze away from the haunting spectacle unfolding before me. Who was this woman? What dark force had drawn her to my doorstep in the dead of night? Questions swirled in my mind like a tempest, but fear rooted me to the spot, rendering me powerless to act. Minutes stretched into hours as I watched, transfixed, as the woman continued her eerie vigil. Time seemed to warp and bend around her, the minutes dragging on like an eternity as I waited with bated breath for some sign, some clue as to her purpose. And then, without warning, she turned. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, her head rotated on her shoulders until her gaze met mine through the peephole, sending a jolt of terror coursing through my veins. Her eyes were empty, devoid of warmth or humanity, two dark pits that seemed to pierce straight through to the core of my being. I stumbled back from the door, heart pounding in my chest like a jackhammer. Panic surged through me like a tidal wave, threatening to overwhelm my senses as I grappled with the reality of what I had just witnessed. Was she real? Or some figment of my fevered imagination, born from the depths of my own paranoia? But even as I tried to rationalize away the encounter, a primal instinct warned me that she was no mere hallucination. She was real, all too real, and whatever dark purpose had brought her to my doorstep was a mystery that I dared not unravel. With trembling hands, I fumbled for the phone on my desk, fingers slipping against the smooth plastic surface as I struggled to dial the numbers for help. But before I could complete the call, a sudden gust of wind swept through the hallway, extinguishing the feeble light of the hallway bulb and plunging me into darkness. And in that moment of utter blackness, I knew with a bone-deep certainty that I was not alone. That she was out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The growling resumed, louder and more insistent than before, echoing through the empty corridors of my mind like a harbinger of doom. And as I huddled in the darkness, clutching the phone to my chest like a talisman against the encroaching night, I knew that my nightmare was far from over. As dusk descended upon the sleepy town, shadows lengthened, and the whispers of the past seemed to dance in the air. The old apartment building stood, a somber sentinel, its windows staring blankly into the night. My two college friends and I, eager to delve into the mysteries of the paranormal, stood before its imposing facade, excitement tinged with apprehension coursing through our veins. The rumors surrounding the apartment were as chilling as the winter winds that whipped through the streets. It was said that no one could spend a single night within its walls without succumbing to fear or fleeing in terror. The tragic tale of a mother who, in a fit of madness, had poisoned her two sons before taking her own life haunted the building like a malevolent specter. Undeterred by the tales of woe, we entered the apartment, our footsteps echoing in the empty corridors. The air seemed heavy, suffused with the weight of sorrow and regret. As we ascended the creaking stairs to the room where the tragedy had unfolded, a sense of unease settled over us like a shroud. The door creaked open, revealing a scene frozen in time. The furniture lay shrouded in dust, the walls adorned with faded wallpaper peeling at the edges. It was as if the apartment itself mourned the lives lost within its confines. Setting up our equipment, we prepared to delve into the unknown, our hearts pounding with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. As the hours passed and the night deepened, the atmosphere grew increasingly oppressive, as if unseen eyes watched our every move. Strange noises echoed through the apartment, disembodied whispers that sent shivers down our spines. Shadows danced in the flickering candlelight, taking on sinister shapes that seemed to mock our presence. As the witching hour approached, a sense of dread descended upon us like a suffocating blanket. The temperature plummeted, our breath forming icy clouds in the air. It was then that we heard it, the sound of children's laughter echoing through the empty rooms, cold and hollow as the grave. Fear gnawed at our resolve, threatening to overwhelm us. But we pressed on, determined to uncover the truth behind the whispers that plagued the apartment. With each passing moment, the barrier between the living and the dead grew thinner, until it seemed as if we stood on the precipice of oblivion itself. Suddenly, a chill wind swept through the room, extinguishing our candles and plunging us into darkness. Panic seized us, our hearts racing as we groped blindly for an escape. But there was none to be found. In the pitch blackness, we heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps approaching, slow and deliberate as the march of death itself. Terror seized us in its icy grip, rendering us paralyzed with fear. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the darkness receded, leaving us trembling in its wake. As the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, we fled the apartment, our minds reeling from the horrors we had witnessed. Though we emerged physically unscathed, our souls bore the scars of that fateful night. The memory of the apartment, with its dark secrets and tragic history, would haunt us forever, a reminder of the thin line that separates the living from the dead. And as we returned to our normal lives, we carried with us the knowledge that some mysteries are best left unsolved, lest they consume us whole. As the moon cast its pale glow over the rural landscape, 62 miles away from the bustling streets of New York City, the night seemed to hold its breath, waiting for something unseen to stir. My boyfriend's old family apartment stood silent and imposing against the backdrop of the countryside, its windows like watchful eyes peering into the darkness. We had escaped the hustle and bustle of New York City for a weekend retreat, seeking solace in the quiet serenity of the countryside. But as I lay in bed, nestled under the covers, a sense of unease washed over me like a cold wave. It started with a whisper, barely audible at first, like the rustling of leaves in the wind. I sat up, straining to hear, my heart pounding in my chest. The voice was faint, almost imperceptible, yet it seemed to echo through the walls of the old apartment, filling the room with a sense of foreboding. I glanced at my boyfriend, sound asleep beside me, oblivious to the strange presence that lurked in the shadows. With trembling hands I reached for the bedside lamp, casting a feeble light into the darkness. But as the light flickered to life, the whispering ceased, leaving only the eerie silence of the night. I told myself it was just my imagination, that the old apartment was playing tricks on my mind. But deep down, I knew that something was amiss. The following day passed in a blur of mundane activities, the events of the previous night fading into the recesses of my mind. But as evening fell once again, the whispering returned, more insistent this time, like a voice pleading to be heard. I tried to dismiss it, to chalk it up to the quirks of an old apartment. But as the night wore on, the whispers grew louder, more persistent, until they seemed to fill every corner of the room. Unable to bear it any longer, I confronted my boyfriend, desperate for answers. But he brushed off my concerns, claiming that I was simply letting my imagination run wild. Yet I could see the doubt flickering in his eyes, the shadow of fear that lingered just beneath the surface. Determined to uncover the truth, I began to investigate the history of the old apartment, searching for any clue that might explain the mysterious whispers that haunted its halls. And that's when I stumbled upon the darkest secret of all. It turned out that my boyfriend's mother had died in this very apartment, under circumstances shrouded in mystery. Rumors swirled in the small town, whispers of foul play and sinister motives that cast a pall over the once idyllic countryside. Driven by a newfound sense of urgency, I delved deeper into the past, uncovering a web of lies and deceit that stretched back generations. And at the center of it all was my boyfriend's family, their hands stained with blood and their hearts heavy with guilt. But as I unearthed the truth, I unwittingly awakened something dark and malevolent that had long lain dormant within the walls of the old apartment. The whispers grew louder, more sinister, until they seemed to consume my very soul, filling me with a terror unlike anything I had ever known. In the dead of night, as the darkness closed in around me, I realized the horrifying truth: the whispers were not coming from the apartment at all. They were coming from within me, a manifestation of the guilt and fear that had taken root in my heart. And as I stood on the brink of madness, teetering on the edge of oblivion, I knew that I could never escape the darkness that lurked within. For sometimes, the greatest horrors are not found in the shadows, but within ourselves. After my wife's passing, I felt like my world had shattered into a million irreparable pieces. Left to pick up the fragments of our shattered lives, I and my daughter, Emily, embarked on a journey of healing, seeking refuge in the familiar yet unfamiliar embrace of the Tower City Apartments in Cleveland. It was a decision made out of practicality, the convenience of its proximity to Emily's school and my home office outweighing any reservations I harbored about the building's ominous facade. The 7th floor became our new sanctuary, a haven where we could cocoon ourselves away from the prying eyes of the outside world, cocooned within the confines of our grief. Yet, despite the solace it offered, there was an underlying unease that permeated the very air we breathed, particularly whenever I stepped foot into the building's unsettling elevator. Its dimly lit interior and eerie silence seemed to echo with the whispers of the past, sending shivers down my spine with each ascent. But practicality prevailed over superstition, and I continued to brave the unnerving ride, if only for the sake of convenience. One ordinary morning, as I bid farewell to Emily, a sense of foreboding lingered in the air like an uninvited guest. It was a feeling I couldn't shake, a nagging sensation that something was amiss. Minutes turned into hours, and with each passing moment, my worry grew like a gnawing pit in the depths of my stomach. Then, like a bolt from the blue, I heard Emily's voice echoing from the depths of the elevator shaft. Panic seized hold of my heart, driving me to investigate. Racing down the corridor, my footsteps echoed in tandem with the pounding of my heart as I flung open the elevator doors to find Emily standing there, her usually vibrant demeanor replaced by an unsettling calm. "Emily, what are you doing here?" My voice trembled with concern as I reached out to her, desperate for some semblance of reassurance. Emily's eyes met mine, but there was something distant about her gaze, as if she were seeing through me rather than looking at me. "I don't know, Dad. I just felt like I had to be here." With a sinking feeling in my chest, I guided Emily back to our apartment, her steps slow and unsteady. As we entered, Emily collapsed onto the couch, her breathing shallow as she drifted into an uneasy slumber. Hours turned into days, and still, Emily remained in a state of eerie tranquility, her presence a haunting reminder of the inexplicable events that had unfolded. Then, one fateful morning, as I answered the doorbell, I was greeted by the sight of Emily standing on the other side, her expression a mask of fear and confusion. "Dad, can I come in?" Her voice was barely a whisper, but the urgency in her tone was unmistakable. I stepped aside, allowing Emily to enter, but as I turned to lead her to her room, my heart plummeted to the pit of my stomach. The room was empty, devoid of any sign of Emily's presence. Panic surged through my veins as I searched every corner of the apartment, calling out her name into the deafening silence that surrounded me. It wasn't until I received a phone call from Emily's school, revealing that she hadn't attended in 3 days, that the full weight of the situation crashed down upon me like a ton of bricks. My mind raced with a million unanswered questions, each more terrifying than the last. What had happened to Emily that fateful day in the elevator? Where had she gone, and why? Days turned into weeks, and still, there was no sign of Emily. My once peaceful existence shattered into a million pieces, haunted by the unanswered questions that lingered in the air like a specter. I found myself drawn back to the 7th floor of the Tower City Apartments, the place where it all began, searching for answers that seemed forever out of reach. But as the months turned into years, I realized that some mysteries are never meant to be solved. And though Emily's absence left a void that could never be filled, I found solace in the memories we shared, forever etched in my heart. In the end, love was the only thing that mattered, transcending time and space, binding us together for eternity. It was the 3rd day in my newly rented apartment. One night, I came home later than usual. As I approached the building, a chill wind whispered through the air, and an eerie silence enveloped the surroundings. But amidst the quiet, I heard a faint, rhythmic thumping echoing from the terrace above. Ignoring the unsettling feeling in my gut, I brushed it off as repair work by the building's owner and headed inside. However, the same noise greeted me when I returned late again, this time sending shivers down my spine. It sounded ominous, like a warning of impending doom. Exhaustion weighed heavily on me as I stepped into my apartment. But the strange noise persisted, unsettling me further. With a sense of dread gnawing at my insides, I made my way to the terrace, the cold night air biting at my skin. As I emerged onto the terrace, The thumping grew louder, resonating through the darkness like a sinister heartbeat. My heart pounded in my chest as I approached the source, expecting the worst. And there, hunched over in the shadows, was a figure clad in tattered clothes, hammering relentlessly at the concrete wall with a fervor that sent chills down my spine. His movements were frenzied, almost inhuman, as if driven by some unseen force. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice trembling with fear. The figure froze, slowly turning to face me with hollow eyes that seemed to pierce through the darkness. "I didn't mean to startle you," he muttered, his voice barely audible over the pounding of my heart. "What are you doing?" I demanded, my voice quivering with dread. He hesitated, his gaze darting around nervously before he spoke in a voice laced with desperation. "I can't stop," he whispered. "I have to finish before it's too late." A chill ran down my spine as his words hung in the air, ominous and foreboding. I backed away slowly, the sense of danger overwhelming me. But before I could escape, a deafening crack split the air, and the concrete wall crumbled before my eyes, revealing a dark abyss beyond. And as I gazed into the depths, a sense of dread washed over me, for I knew that something sinister lurked within, something that hungered for more than just concrete and steel. With a scream caught in my throat, I turned and fled, the echoes of the figure's haunting laughter following me into the night. As I reached the safety of my apartment, I trembled with fear, haunted by the memory of the figure on the terrace and the darkness that lurked beyond. And as I lay in bed, the sound of his relentless hammering echoing in my ears, I couldn't shake the feeling that something malevolent lingered in the shadows, waiting to claim its next victim. The party at Sarah's apartment was in full swing, the air thick with laughter and the pulsating beat of music. But beneath the facade of merriment, a shadow loomed, casting a pall over the festivities. I arrived at the party with a sense of anticipation, eager to let loose and forget the troubles of the outside world. But as I stepped through the threshold of Sarah's apartment, a chill swept through me, prickling the hairs on the back of my neck with an icy touch. Sarah greeted me with a forced smile, her eyes glinting with an unsettling intensity that sent a shiver down my spine. It had been a week since her boyfriend had left her, blaming me for their breakup in a fit of rage. But Sarah had never shown any anger or resentment towards me, at least not until now. As the night wore on and the drinks flowed freely, I found myself drawn into the whirlwind of the party, losing myself in the sea of faces and laughter. But amidst the revelry, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss, a lingering sense of unease that refused to be ignored. It wasn't until the early hours of the morning, when most of the other guests had drifted home, that I realized the true extent of Sarah's wrath. Alone in her apartment, the music a mere echo of its former self, I stumbled upon a scene straight out of a nightmare. The lights flickered and dimmed, casting long, twisting shadows that danced across the walls like specters in the night. And there, in the center of the room, stood Sarah, her once familiar features twisted into a mask of pure malice. Her eyes bore into mine with an intensity that made my blood run cold, sending a shiver of fear coursing through my veins. In her hand she held a knife, its blade gleaming in the dim light like a beacon of doom. I tried to speak, to reason with her, but my words caught in my throat like a lump of lead, suffocating me with their weight. I knew then, with a sickening certainty, that Sarah's intentions were anything but benign. With a low, guttural growl, she lunged forward, the knife flashing in the darkness like a bolt of lightning. I stumbled backward, my heart hammering in my chest like a drumbeat of terror, as she pursued me with a single-minded determination that bordered on madness. The apartment seemed to warp and twist around us, the walls closing in with each frantic step I took, trapping me in a labyrinth of fear and despair. I searched desperately for an escape, a way out of this waking nightmare, but everywhere I turned, Sarah was there, her eyes burning with a fury that threatened to consume us both. And then, just as I felt the cold steel of the knife graze my skin, I saw it. A glimmer of light, a flicker of hope amidst the darkness. With a surge of adrenaline-fueled determination, I lunged for the door, throwing it open with a strength I didn't know I possessed. I stumbled into a hallway, gasping for breath, the sounds of Sarah's enraged screams echoing in my ears like a symphony of madness. But as I fled into the safety of the night, I knew that the terror was far from over. For Sarah's wrath was a force beyond reckoning, a nightmare incarnate that would haunt me for the rest of my days. And as I disappeared into the darkness, I prayed that I would never again have to face the chilling reality of her revenge.